Let's learn how to make a circle skirt. So first thing I'm gonna start with is a circle skirt is actually just a circle with a hole cut out of it for your waist, and we need to figure out how to draw that hole for your waist. And the way that that's done is C equals 2 pi r, so the circumference of a circle is equals 2 times pi times the radius of the circle. We don't need the circumference because the circumference is going to be the size of our hips. I need actually the r, so if we rearrange the C equals 2 pi r equation, it comes up with r equals C divided by 2 pi. Now you're probably gonna get like a weird decimal number because that's just how circles be. But for me it's 6 point something something something. I'm going to round that up to 7 because here's the thing: if that number's a little bit bigger, well, that's what the elastic is for. Now I am going to be exceptionally lazy and say whatever length of my skirt is going to be however much I have fabric for. Now the fabric that I have is very long but not very wide because this is secondhand fabric, which is part of the reason why I'm being very lazy with this skirt. I'm just like, it's free fabric. So what I'm going to do is I am going to have, instead of one full circle, I'm going to have 2 half circles, and then I'm going to sew them together to make one full circle. The way to do that, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go all along the long edge, and I'm just going to fold my fabric in half so that I can cut out both of the half circles at once. And then the second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fold the entire thing in half again so that instead of cutting out 2 half circles, I am going to be technically cutting out 4 quarter circles, but they're going to be on a fold, which means it's going to end up being 2 half circles. So I'm still going to be cutting out both of these half circles at once. It's just they're going to be also folded here, and then when I unfold it, it's going to be 2 half circles that I then have to sew together. So here now is my fabric. It's been, oh come on, don't be shifty. It's been folded so that there's folded once, folded twice, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold it again, and instead of having quarter circles, this is going to be 8 circles. So this corner right here, over here where there's 2 folds, that is going to be where the middle of my circle is, and in order to get this into quarter circles, I'm going to pinch right here and fold it this way. So now I have this divided into quarters. And the main reason I'm doing this is because drawing a full half circle, quarter circle even, is very annoying, but circles are symmetrical in all directions, which means if I do this, it means that I will only have to draw a part of the circle. And then I have this out here because then I can use this as seam allowance for when I sew the 2 pieces together, and I don't have to worry about that jagged edge. I'm also just gonna put a few heavy things on it so that it doesn't go anywhere because this fabric is very shifty. It does not want to stay and behave. I'm gonna use my chalk wheel to mark this because the wheel should help roll over this fabric without it wanting to stick. But first I'm going to draw that inside circle of 7 inches. So I'm basically just going to go from the very corner where I folded it to mark 7 inches. Right there. Going with a shorter ruler that doesn't get bumped onto everything. 7 inches right there. Pivot, mark the 7, line up the 7 inches, mark it, line up the 7 inches. Mark it, and then that means I can draw a little curved line that is going to be the hole that I'm going to cut out for my waist. Now the thing about this hole is I'm going to need some seam allowance so that I can actually sew some elastic to it. So this is a seam gauge, and it has a little red slidey thingy that I can slide to whatever number. So I've got my seam gauge at 1/2 inch because my seam allowance is going to be 1/2 inch, and then I just mark it along. Take the red, line it up with my existing line, put a mark in there, and now I have my new line that this is actually going to be what I cut along, and as you can see, my line is horrible, but I'm going to cut along this line for when I actually cut out my skirt. Now for the rest of the skirt, I'm still going to measure from this point here, and I'm just going to make this skirt as long as it can be. So I'm going to measure how long the shortest portion is, and then copy that measurement all along the bottom in the same method as the top so that I get a bottom for my skirt. I forgot to press play on that clip, but I marked out little points that are all at 29 inches and then connected them all with a line because this to the top is 29 inches. That's the smallest point, so I can't make the skirt any longer than that if I wanted to actually have a even hem. Also, I want to mention this is a method I like to call chaos sewing. If you would like to do the actual more official method, you can, but no one ever shows this chaos method of sewing. And I'm sewing to have fun, and I think this is the most fun method. So now I have to cut this out. If you had actually decided how long you wanted your skirt to be and didn't just go with however long the fabric is, you would have had to add a hem onto this, a hem allowance, but I'm just going with how much fabric I have. Now, you could use a rotary cutter and mat to cut this out, but I did not plan ahead and I don't want to try moving this in case it gets misaligned, so I'm going to go in with these pretty iridescent scissors. And I'm going to cut along the line up here, which is my seam allowance line. Like that. And then I'm going to cut along the line down here. Now again, if you had added hem allowance to this, which I didn't because I'm being lazy, you would cut along whatever your hem allowance line is, not your fold line for your hem. So now I'm just going to cut this out. There we go. Get rid of the scraps, and now here comes the magic. I'm going to take these off, and now this should unfold. See, there's my quarter circles. And then unfold again. Ooh, this doesn't even fit on camera. But I have 2 half circles now. And I should probably trim this front edge, the seam allowance line edge that is actually straight. Okay, I've got 1 layer at a time because the layers do not want to stay together, which is why I'm only doing 1 layer at a time. Line up my ruler. Go at it with my rotary cutter. Boom! I got a straight line. If this is not entirely straight, I do not care because this is chaos sewing, and because this is a circle skirt, that's going to go into an elastic. So if it's not exactly the right size, then who cares? It's still going to fit because of elastics. Alright, so I'm too lazy to pull my serger out, so I'm going to do French seams on this skirt, and I've decided this side is the right side and this side is the wrong side of the fabric. Fun fact, you can just decide which side is the right side and wrong side of your fabric depending on which one you like better. It doesn't actually matter what other people think. So, with my circles, I have to sew the 2 side seams so that it makes a full circle. So here's half my circle, here's the other half of my circle. I'm going to put them wrong sides together and then sew that line. Again, since this is a French seam, I'm sewing it wrong sides together first. And basically the way French seams work is your first line just has to be smaller than your second lines of sewing. So my first line of sewing is going to be nice and small of a seam allowance so that my second line of sewing can be a bigger seam allowance. What's the actual size? I don't really know, and I don't really care because this is chaos sewing, and elastic will make this fit at the end. I am actually capable of like proper seam allowance sewing, it's just I'm at the point right now where for my personal sewing, I don't care enough. We're gonna go chaotic. Also, there's a method in sewing, which is mostly used in industrial manufacturing, where instead of using pins or anything, you actually just use tension to keep everything together, because pins is time, time is money. Okay, so now I've got that first line sewn, which is essentially this line on my circle skirt chart. I am now going to put the fabric right sides together in order to sew this exact same line again, but with a bigger seam allowance, which is what creates the French seam that basically makes like a little extra tube where all of your raw edges are hiding inside. And then after I do that, I'm going to press. Now, if you're starting out with sewing, I highly recommend you actually do press this, because this seam right here has to be right against the edge, right along here, when I sew my second line, in order for the whole French seam thing to work, and that is very difficult to do if you are just starting. Ironing is basically a way to bully your fabric into doing what you want it to do, which is why if you are not an experienced seamstress who's very good at bullying fabric into doing what you want it to do in other ways, you should definitely iron this before you start. And after that, you're just going to do those same 2 steps of sewing wrong sides together and then right sides together for the other side of your circle skirt. Alright, and it's already starting to take shape. Here's a circle. This is going to be down here, but oh my gosh, my camera angles are not working because this space is too small and my phone won't zoom out. Alright, now when it comes to ironing, this is probably some sort of polyester. So I have to make sure to set my temperature for this at a very low temperature. And if I had to guess, I would say this is probably either nylon or polyester. So I'm gonna set the temperature nice and low. Now, here is my seam, my French seam that I have ironed that is very, very puckery. And I am going to just iron it flat first in the exact way that I would have sewn it. Be flat. Don't be annoying. Okay, now I have to open this out flat, like this. And I have to essentially press the seam either towards the front or the back. Pro tip, paperweights will keep your fabric from trying to fall off the table on you. And now I'm going to press this seam one way, and then I'm going to press it the other way. But when I press it one way, I have to make sure it's actually flat. I don't want to press any like accidental little pleats into it. So I like to pin it with my iron, pull on it so that it actually is flat, and then scooch my iron over, and then spread it apart with my fingers as I go. Like that. And then it's flat in one direction, and then I fold it to the other direction. Press that as well. Now, if you had not done a French seam, if you had like serged your seams or whatever, you, after this step, would press your seam allowances open. I did a French seam and I can't press these open, so I'm going to press them that way. And we're going to say maybe that's the back of the skirt now. Now, you might have heard this thing where you're supposed to let your circle skirt hang for a while before you hem it, and that is because with a circle skirt, there is no choice but to cut at least part of it on a bias because it's a circle, it's a curve. Anytime you have a curve, it's going to be on a bias in some spots. The reason these seams, these side seams, were so easy to sew is because this was actually on a straight grain, and now the middle part of that is also on the straight grain or the cross grain, and actually, but everything else is on a bias, which means as you let it hang, this skirt can actually stretch out of shape, and then your perfectly even hem will no longer be even after it hangs for a while or after you wear it for a while. There is, however, a slight exception to this because this fabric is extremely tightly woven. Like, you hear that? And when I tug on it, it doesn't really warp much at all, which means this fabric, when I let it hang, even on a bias, it's not going to stretch out very much. It's probably still going to stretch out like maybe a little tiny bit, but not a significantly noticeable amount. Whereas a shifty, loosely woven fabric, and very flowy, like this, if I were to put this on a bias, it will definitely stretch out of shape. So lightweight, flowy kind of fabrics like this, definitely hang it before you try to hem it, because your hem will not be even otherwise. But if you're doing chaos sewing, where you don't care too much, and you have a very tightly woven fabric like this, that does not warp and does not shift out of shape, you can sometimes get away with just hemming it right away. So let's go hem it. Now, when you hem a circle skirt, it's going to take forever, but I want to make sure I hem it properly with this going to the wrong side instead of hemming the hem going towards the right side. So I usually like to start hemming close to one of my seams so I can be sure the seam allowance is going on the inside. I also like to just trim off that corner of seam allowance just a smidge to reduce bulk in there, because usually circle skirts have like a very tiny hem in order to allow them to do their full flowiness job. So when you have a very tiny flowy hem, the bulk of a seam allowance actually makes a significant difference. So now I'm going to fold over just a teeny smidge, put my presser foot down, and I'm going to start sewing it. And the way I personally like to do this is I just fold it over, sew up to there, fold it over, sew up to where I folded, and just keep going for the entire skirt, because I hate hemming. Sorry, I hate ironing, and I find this easier than actually ironing anything. Again, the smaller the hem, the better when it comes to circle skirts. And as you can see by how long this extremely sped up clip is, hemming a circle skirt takes for freaking ever. Okay, we are now here at the end, and we have come all the way, we've come all the way around back to the beginning. Get down there. Okay, I wasn't super careful on that first hem because I'm going to be turning this a second time and stitching it down a second time. So basically what we're doing right here is a baby rolled hem or a double rolled hem where we fold it once and then we fold it a second time in order to hide any of those raw edges. So the first time was kind of like my preliminary time, so I didn't care too much about exactly how well I did it. But now I really... Unfortunately, no matter how good you are at doing rolled hems and baby rolled hems like this, hemming a circle skirt is still just going to take forever because the bottom of that circle, the size of the hem is just really freaking big. And now I have my little baby rolled hem. And if I see any waviness like this, I might just go ahead and give it a press. Actually, I think I will because this skirt, well, this fabric just does not look good if it gets sewn and it hasn't been pressed. So I'm just going to give that hem a quick press. But a not so fun fact about circle skirts is that since they are a circle and the entire bottom is on a curve, the bigger your hem is, the more difficult it will be to hem your circle skirt. Because since this measurement out here where the bottom of your hem allowance is bigger than the measurement up here where you're sewing it to, if you have a bigger hem, the difference of that measurement will be a lot bigger. Whereas if you have a smaller hem, the difference between that measurement will be a lot smaller. So it's kind of like the difference of trying to sew something that is 5 centimeters to something that is 10 centimeters, which is very difficult to get it to lay nice and flat and look nice, versus sewing something that is 5 centimeters to something that is 6 centimeters. It's a lot easier to do it that way if you don't have as big of a difference between the two measurements. Another thing you might note is, especially on some of the more 45-degree angle bias areas of the skirt, is that it will be kind of wavy like this because you've essentially stretched that fabric while you were hemming it, because that's kind of unavoidable when you're sending fabric through the machine. The act of sewing something itself starts to distort the fabric, which is another reason why ironing your hem is very nice afterwards. And since I only want to iron things once and I have the ability to bully the fabric into doing what I'm doing without the iron when I'm hemming it, that is why I iron my hems afterwards and not before. Depending on how tiny your hem is, you might find little thready bits. This is bits of the fabric that has frayed and it just didn't quite get caught in your tiny rolled hem. You can just clip those off. The ones along the seam right here are the bits of fabric that frayed from the raw edge of the fabric before I sewed it into my French seam, because those raw edges are still in there. They're just sandwiched inside a little fabric tube. Sometimes they start to peek through, and that is why the second line of stitching on French seams has to be bigger, at a bigger seam allowance than the first line of stitching. Next up, we gotta attach an elastic to the waistband of our circle skirt, and this is a giant roll of elastic that I picked up secondhand that just so happens to be navy blue and therefore matches my fabric beautifully. So you're just gonna take your elastic, put it around your waist, and a little bit snugger than the actual size of your waist is something that I found is a good idea to do, because if you make it the exact size of your waist, then it tends to feel as if your clothes are falling off every once in a while, because your elastic waistband is supporting the weight of your entire skirt. And when it comes to being a circle skirt, that is a lot of fabric, and that stuff is heavy. If you decide to add pockets into your circle skirt, it's going to be even heavier whenever you put anything in the pockets. So cutting a length of elastic that is actually a smidge smaller than your waist is actually very helpful for keeping everything snug. Now I'm going to go sew this elastic right sides together on this line so that it's an actual cylinder instead of just loose elastic. And I'm going to do this with a straight stitch. Now, a straight stitch does not stretch. You will need a zigzag stitch later on. The thing is, with elastic like this, it stretches this way. It doesn't stretch this way at all, which means when I'm sewing it this way in order to make it a cylinder, I do not need a stretch stitch. Alright, done. We got a cylinder for my waistband. Now, I do want to note that after I sewed it right sides together, I also folded under those raw edges and top stitched them in place, because this elastic, she tends to fray. Okay, now I've got my skirt, and I'm going to mark the quarter-way points for the skirt and the elastic on the waist area. On the side, the halfway point is really easy because those are the two side seams, and to find halfway between those 2 points, I'm just going to fold the 2 side seams together, fold it in half. Here's one other halfway point, or 1/4 way point. I'm going to stick a pin in it to mark it, and then I'm going to fold them together again, go the other way. Here is the other 1/4 way point. I'm going to mark it with a pin. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing to my waistband elastic. This point right here, this is going to be where I base everything else from. So if I fold everything in half from the point in which I sewed it together, I can find the other halfway point and then stick a pin in it so I know where it is and I don't lose it. And then I'm going to do the same thing like with my skirt waistband. I'm going to fold these 2 points together, go one way, here's the other quarter, here's the other quarter. Mark those with a pin. Voila. Okay, so now I have before me my skirt with the quarter pieces marked out as well as my waistband. What I'm going to do now is I am going to put it wrong sides together at those 4 points. So here's the wrong side of my waistband. Here's the wrong side of my skirt. I'm going to put them together just a smidge offset. So I'm not actually matching the edges of my waistband and my skirt. I am offsetting them at point number 1, point number 2. Ow. Try not to stab yourself with pins while you do this, or at least try not to stab yourself too much, too hardly, too harshly. Try not to get blood on your project. There we go. Like that. I have all 4 of my quarter places pinned now, and you'll notice that the fabric piece is bigger than the elastic piece. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to stretch this piece and sew 1/4 section at a time. However, sometimes, since this is curved and the elastic is not curved, you'll see they don't want to line up properly. So I might stick a pin in it so that it doesn't go anywhere on my ironing board, stretch it out so that I can line things up with where I want them to go. Stretch it out like that. Nope, stop that. There we go. I stretch it out a little bit, and then I make the edges match a little bit more, and I'll stick an extra pin in there so that things are evenly distributed and the middle part actually lines up with where I want it to line up. If the stretching method doesn't work, you could also put these 2 pins, these 2 quarter pins together and do the fold in half method to figure out where they're supposed to line up. They're supposed to line up like that. And then I can stick a pin in it. Ta-da! And then sewing smaller sections at a time, it's much easier to make things line up. Okay, this is going to seem odd, but I'm going to stick with my straight stitch for now, because before I sew my elastic on permanently, I want to baste it on. And basting is going to be removed, which means I don't actually need it to do what I want the final line of stitching to do. I'm going to put my fabric underneath my presser foot, put the needle down right at where my pin is so that I can take the pin out. The needle holds everything in place, and then I can put the presser foot down so that I can sew it. I'm going to grab this pin, which is where things are lining up, pull on it so that everything is stretched taut in between, and baste it down. Once I get to that pin, I'm going to first go up to that pin, take the pin out, go to my next pin in order to stretch things out and make sure they line up. And remember, this is just basting. Now, if you're going to stop, don't stop here with the needle up and tug. You might accidentally pull your fabric out. Needle down before you start pulling on your elastic and your fabric. Boop. Yeah. Now that I've basted everything, what's going to happen next is I'm going to fold this down before zigzag stitching all along that basted line, essentially, in order to hold things in place temporarily in a way that still allows the elastic to stretch. Right now, I can still stretch a little bit since I sewed that basting line while the elastic was stretched, so now it can still stretch just a smidge, but not very much. But before I have to do that, take a look at that presser foot. I'm going to have to change that to a zigzag foot before I can start zigzagging. Now, the lighting is horrible, but when I go to do my zigzag, I turn my stitch width up to the highest it can be to do the biggest zigzag it can, widest zigzag, and I turn my stitch length up to, I don't know, approximately 1.5 right now, so that it gets a shorter zigzag. Alright, so now I just take this elastic, flip it up, and remember, it was wrong sides together, which means I am now sewing from the top, which is the right side, which is the pretty side. So, by sewing from the pretty side up, I can make sure that everything looks nice when I sew, or at least I have a better chance of it. So, I'm going to put my presser foot down, and remember, I'm going to be stitching right close to that line of basting, because that line of basting essentially gives me a good idea of where that raw edge is, and I want to zigzag over the raw edge in a way that catches it in between the elastic and the fabric so that it's not going to be visible from either side. So now I can turn this on, and don't forget your back stitch. And I'm going to smooth everything out before I stitch over it. That smoothing step is very important. Do not forget it. I smooth, and then I sew. And I don't have to stretch anything right now because the zigzag stitch itself will allow this elastic to stretch after. And I now have a cute new skirt. Oh, this is lovely. I'm gonna go try it on. This filming really doesn't want to cooperate, but like, there we go. I got a new circle skirt. Very twirly. Very cute. I don't believe in intros because I think I want to get to the point of the video as quickly as possible. I clicked on this video to watch it for a reason. I'm not here to watch an intro, but I do feel like I should say something as an outro so that you guys can skip this if you want. If you do decide to stick around and listen to me blab for a little bit though, much appreciated. So this is a new, slightly longer form of content that I'm trying out because my shorter videos were popular, and now I'm like, okay, I guess I should do some longer videos. I hope you enjoyed this circle skirt tutorial. I'm not entirely sure how comprehensive and understandable this kind of tutorial is because things are very obvious in my head, but that does not necessarily mean I did a good job getting them through to you guys. And when I teach people in person, I can see the look of confusion on their faces when something that I said does not compute. But since I'm talking to a camera, I'm like trying to look at my own face, but the camera's like slightly over there because I'm filming on my phone. And I cannot tell. I have no feedback. So if you guys would like to leave a comment as to whether or not this actually made sense, if you like this kind of stuff, that would be very much appreciated. If you like my content, I am also on YouTube. Wait, this is YouTube. I'm also on Instagram and TikTok, although my TikTok is a little bit more chaotic. It's not always decently nice videos with decent editing. It's sometimes just me making a quick video blab about what I am doing. If you're interested, you can find me on TikTok at The Ottawa Cryptid. That is the only one with like a different name because again, it's not an official account. On Instagram, YouTube, and Ko-fi though, my username is Coco Creates Arts because I'm too lazy to register as anything other than myself. Legal tax stuff is very confusing. I'll probably have to get to it someday. But if you would like to support me on other platforms, that would be much appreciated. My Ko-fi shop has a shop. My Ko-fi has a shop. That's a better sentence. My Ko-fi has a little mini shop with some actual physical items, or if you'd just like to buy me a Ko-fi, leave me a tip, that would also be very much appreciated because I am technically not monetized. Maybe I will be someday. Who knows? I'd love to be able to make money by just being chaotic and doing sewing, although I suspect I probably should get better at filming videos first. Anyways, if you guys like this sort of thing and this video gets good reception, I guess, I will try to do more longer form content like this. Happy sewing! Goodbye!